Kia ora. I'm Sasha Borissenko and welcome to Chewing the Facts. In this series, I hope to untangle some of the science, history, assumptions and forces behind fatness in Aotearoa. Could everything we know about weight be wrong? Or at least more complicated? In this episode, I'm going to look deeper into what are known as obesogenic environments. That's a place that's shaped by cheap, convenient and appealing ultra-processed foods, barriers to exercise, and economic and social pressures that aren't conducive to leading a healthy life. Think high concentrations of fast food outlets. Yum, and I'm already smelling the nostalgia of my childhood. Oh, hello.
Hi, please place your order.
Hi, can you tell me what's the healthiest thing on your menu?
Probably the wraps, the grilled chicken wraps.
The grilled chicken wraps. So are there different varieties?
No, there's just a small one or a large one.
A small one or a large one, okay. How small is small? Would it feed me?
Yeah.
I'll get that, thanks. Oh my gosh, I didn't realise that a Big Mac was only $7.70.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. Oh, tempting. No, I'll get the grilled snack wrap.
So, anything else?
No, that's all good, thank you.
Okay, how about that?
Okay, bye. Places that encourage driving where it's hard to access healthy food options. The inner aisles of the supermarket, where there's a 2-for-1 sale on yummy goodies and only while stocks last. And rent is high, bills aren't cheap, so the daily grind of work takes precedence over living, laughing and loving your most healthy self. Despite society's disapproval of fatness, the world we live in and continue to create sets people up to fail. Latest New Zealand Health Survey figures suggest 1 in 3 adults aged 15 years and over have a body mass index of more than 30. Of those, 71% are Pasifika, almost 51% are Māori. Indigenous communities are touted for being overrepresented in obesity statistics, but we know the body mass index is deeply problematic for, discriminating against everyone other than white European men from the 1800s. These communities are also overrepresented in stats relating to death rates, poverty, mental health, unemployment, housing insecurity, imprisonment, and everything else that makes a catchy headline. It surely can't be coincidence that an extra helping of society's discontentment towards fatness is also reserved for people of colour. The impact of colonisation and the context of fatness in Aotearoa can't be ignored.
My name is Emma Tavola. I am a mother, curator, a small business owner, beneficiary, and a proud fat Fijian woman living in South Auckland. From where I'm from in Fiji, on one hand, we really celebrate fatness. That I never associated fatness with being unattractive or undesirable because we don't, I think from an Indigenous lens, what we look like and how we present to the world isn't the most important. It's not our value system, I know in a Western sense, and I was raised in a very European environment, you sort of feel if you're not skinny and white that you are not desirable. But fortunately, when you sit in Pacific spaces, that's not our world view.
I first met Emma last year at Camp Boom. It's a weekend of fun and power for fat babes. Emma led a panel discussing the intersections of indigeneity and fatness. Intersectionality refers to ways where different aspects of a person's identity can expose them to overlapping forms of discrimination and oppression. The panel discussed the intersections of racism, sexism, and fat discrimination in Aotearoa. Here she is talking to Cameron Taylor, a creative writing student and Te Ao Māori editor for Massive magazine.
What do you know and how do you feel about whakaaro Māori around fatness?
It's just sort of normal in our communities. Like, you go on the marae and you see big people and it's just not like a thing. Like, no one makes a thing out of it. And the way that we show our aroha is through kai. You know, you if you're the manuhiri and you're on the marae, you're going to get a feed, like 100%. And if you don't eat that food, like, they're going to be pissed. Like, you can never leave the marae without, like, eating kai, you know? So it's just normal in our communities. Like, that's how we show our aroha, that's how we connect with each other. We're not thinking about fucking calories and, like, what's in this and is this, you know.
Emma advocates for moana or Oceania, a term she uses to include Māori and Pacifica peoples hailing from the moana, or sea. She lives in Aotearoa, an area in South Auckland where about 80% of the population is Polynesian and 20% are Māori.
I mean, like, I think global cultures, you know, food is a big part of ritual and celebration and connection. And so it's kind of easy to say, oh, Pacific people love eating, you know. It's, I think it's more than that. You know, colonisation and capitalism have created systems that are killing us. In Fiji, there was this migrations to the cities, so removal from land systems or food systems where, you know, it's all connected. You have to not have demands of things like electricity bills and money needs to have time to put into a garden, to have time to harvest. So it's a whole system. If you take a Fijian out of that system, take anyone out of that system, they're going to have to find nourishment in other ways. If they're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, what are you going to eat that's easy or can fit around that finite time that you have? It's going to be easily accessible. If you're in low-paid work, it's cheap food. Largely cheap food is processed, imported, rubbish food.
The WHO says a major reason for the rising obesity rates is an increase in imported foods. It says many Pacific Islanders have replaced their traditional diets of vegetables and fruits with imported processed foods.
You can actually trace origins of when the Pacific became a dumping ground for the West's offcuts and calorie-dense foods. Exporting canned and processed foods, such as sheep tongues, jellied veal and corned beef, gained popularity in New Zealand as early as the 1890s. Fast forward to World War II. Japanese and US occupations of the Pacific Islands saw the introduction of rice, canned meats, and the likes of spam.
Spam. Don't knock it till you've fried it.
In 2007, New Zealand exported nearly 40,000 tonnes of mutton flaps to the islands. These are high-fat trimmings from a sheep's belly. Richie poos in New Zealand don't eat this stuff. That's why it's shipped overseas. Here's Emma again.
Yeah, I guess a sort of micro example of that is in my village, which the population can be like between 100 and 160, 180. When a new resort was built on a neighbouring island, it created opportunities of employment and pay for a lot of people. So a lot of our village members went and worked at the resort and got paid in cash. And so they moved out of the food system. So they're not there to plant, to harvest, to maintain the land. This is a small Pacific island. And so there's not like fridges run on diesel. And so you don't have a lot of perishable food. If you're not going out fishing to eat, prepare the food and eat it the same day, it's not, you're not really keeping a lot of food for a long time. So non-perishable foods are easy. Noodles, tinned meats, that kind of thing. So you can definitely see the connection in my village of how the food system changes because the economics changes.
But back to Aotearoa. Emma's been living in South Auckland for more than 20 years. And while it's a place that inspires her, keeping her connected to the Pacific, it's also your quintessential obesogenic environment.
A lot of our fruit and veg shops are selling low-grade, poor-quality produce. It's cheaper because it's largely produce which you wouldn't find in a supermarket. And a lot of it's quite close to expiration. And then that's just like food to cook. So then you think about the takeaways. You could basically find every second shop is a takeaway, and then you have a TAB, you have $2 shops galore, and we had a headstone shop. So it was like death, dying, gone, you know. This is what social deprivation is the options, the opportunities in communities like this are just so much lesser. You know, I have worked in South Auckland for almost 2 decades, and I remember just craving coffee. Like, I love coming to town and sitting in a cafe, and just the cafe culture is something that you don't generally have in communities that don't have a lot of excess income.
Emma is describing a food swamp here. These are areas that are inundated with poor quality foods that undermine health. Research suggests food swamps mostly affect marginalised racial and ethnic groups living in under-resourced areas. Here's Akant Veer, a marketing professor at the University of Canterbury.
One of my colleagues ran a mapping study of where all the pokies are and where all the gambling outlets are in Aotearoa Christchurch, and they were heavily focused in usually the lower socioeconomic suburbs. We see the same sort of thing happening with fast food outlets as well, where there is a higher concentration in these areas. Again, one could argue, well, they're just following the demand, that's what people want. Others would say their mere presence is causing or creating that demand and normalising it and creating an obesogenic environment. Do corporates do this on purpose? The evidence suggests maybe. Do we know for sure? It's impossible to say, and I don't think you'll ever find a corporate to say we purposely target poorer suburbs with our products because we know they'll buy it, because that is terrible PR and terrible marketing.
Kids, you must remember every time you're in the car, and it makes no difference if you're going near or far. If you're in the front seat or if you're in the back, click goes your seat belt before you hit the track.
With almost 12,000 staff, 170 restaurants around the country, and serving 1.6 million New Zealanders a week, I had to talk to McDonald's. New Zealand was one of the first countries in the world to open a franchise in 1976. Globally, the fast food chain has almost 2 million employees and serves around 17 million people a day. Here's Simon Kenny. He's the head of communications. He rejects the claim McDonald's targets socially deprived areas.
I think that's a great example of a legacy argument that's been around for decades that I can really easily dispel just by talking about where we build restaurants, but it's one that people grab onto. Like, McDonald's targets lower socioeconomic areas and has more restaurants in those areas. And you go, okay, well, look at a map of New Zealand and look at where we've built our restaurants, and I can show you that's not true. There's certainly suburbs where we'd love to have a restaurant, or areas where it's hard to find sites. But there was a piece a couple of years ago on one of the Sunday current affairs shows about, I think it was about obesity in South Auckland, and they said McDonald's has 10 restaurants in the Mangere area, proof that they're targeting lower socioeconomic areas. They didn't say in that article that the 5 of those 10 were at the airport.
John Mann says the concentration of fast food outlets in Mangere has to be seen to be believed.
Let's have a look at Mangere Town Centre here on the map. You go.
And there's a KFC there, right?
Yeah.
Burger King just there, McDonald's right here. And
Yep, Mangere has been invaded by fast food businesses just a few minutes' walk from each other. Within a 5k radius, they've got 6 McDonald's, 4 KFCs. It's calorie central.
Just that was a misrepresentation of why we had so many restaurants in that region. But we do have restaurants in lower socioeconomic areas as well, because the way that we plan restaurants, which is quite technical in terms of how we assess sites and look at them, is, we map out the country and look at opportunities. That's what we do. Is it a visible site? Yes. Has it got good access off a main road? Yes. Is there traffic, because 70% of our customers in most restaurants come through drive-through? What's the population around that area? How much would it cannibalise sales from other restaurants? Those are the kinds of factors that we do. Then you overlay things like, are there schools nearby? So we had a site in Pukekohe I can think of where Pukekohe High School kind of backed onto the site, even though we were on different roads. And we were going, well, that's probably not a great place for a McDonald's. But yeah, we definitely would refute any accusations that we sit there all day at work going, how do you build more restaurants in a poor area? But I don't disagree that food outlet-wise, there are definitely way more food outlets in certain areas. I don't disagree with that.
Game theory could explain why fast food restaurants tend to be in clusters. The idea goes, sharing profits with nearby restaurants is more effective than one restaurant sitting in isolation. It also draws in customers, and socially deprived areas tend to be cheaper to rent. A 2017 study found there are 722 food swamps in Aotearoa. Convenience stores and fast food outlets were significantly higher in economically deprived areas. In contrast, a food desert describes areas with limited access to affordable and nutritious food. I live in central Wellington. I'm close to public transportation, supermarkets, cafes, and can walk to most places I need to. So it's pretty much the opposite of a food swamp. To see a food desert IRL, I spoke to Max Rashbrook. He's a Governance and Policy Studies Senior Associate at Victoria University of Wellington. We chatted in my Nissan Tida, which usually operates as an on-road storage unit. But thankfully, I took out the giant chest of drawers in the boot before the interview. We drove to eastern Porirua to find answers.
So what we're coming into is one of the poorest parts of the country, Porirua East, which was kind of a planned suburb in some senses back in the 50s and 60s, partly to provide housing for the Todd motor factory, to employ a couple of thousand people, I think. Obviously that's, all gone the way of the dodo quite some time ago, and in a sense, economically the area has probably never recovered. So it's a very low income area, quite a lot of state housing, a lot of low decile schools, and one of the consequences of that is that there's not a lot of good healthy food provision in this area. There isn't a proper big supermarket in Porirua East, and so for a lot of people their realistic food choices are just the local convenience stores and dairies, and they don't stock much by way of healthy food.
Structurally, could food swamps and food deserts be the result of council zoning or consent issues? I went to local government minister Karen McAnulty, who then passed me on to the Department of Internal Affairs. I also went to the National Party's local government spokesperson, Simon Watts, who left me on red, which is cool. I'm very well versed in the millennial art of ghosting. A million rabbit holes later, the Department of Internal Affairs said my best bet was to go to each individual council in the country. There are 78 local, regional and unitary councils, all with different rules and regulations. They're each in charge of operations. Then there's the issue of the Resource Management Act, which regulates land use, zoning and planning law, which comes under the Ministry for the Environment. At this point, I realised I'm not paid enough. Thankfully, the Department of Internal Affairs said in some cases the government will issue national requirements or trump cards to councils. Alas, a spokesperson said in the context of food swamps and food deserts, there's no national direction whatsoever. It's not on the government's agenda. Food swamps and food deserts distort the idea we're all on a level playing field when it comes to food options and choice. In Aotearoa East, there's no choice at all. But back to Max.
We like to think that we're a classless society, right? Food consumption is one of the ways in which people are really strongly judged in New Zealand, because it's a very visible form of consumption. It's kind of inescapably there in a lot of those Instagram accounts or those influencer accounts where they're very overtly manifesting the healthiness of their, spirulina smoothies or whatever it is. I mean, yes, you might be consuming that stuff because it is genuinely healthy, but it's very hard to avoid the conclusion there's some kind of display going on there and they're asserting a certain kind of status and a certain kind of lifestyle as desirable. And what you also definitely get is a lot of judgment about the food choices that lower income families make.
An influencer is someone who has the power to, influence. They use their knowledge, position, or personality to build a bond with their followers. A social media influencer is someone who has acquired or developed recognition through their following on social media accounts.
This is tricky because exploring fatness while also talking about the food environment inadvertently results in some sort of blame or moral judgment around food choices. But suppose we were to use this harmful logic. It's important to ask, why are there such limited choices in deprived areas? And what's being done about it? Shouldn't all people have cheap, nutritious, convenient food options?
Well, I think one of the first things that happens when you're living in poverty is that you end up with very, very constrained choices, if indeed you really have any meaningful choices at all. When researchers have looked into this, they've done calculations about how much money does it take to buy decent food. So to buy food that meets a nutritional standard where you're getting a decent sort of, a balanced diet over a period of a week or so. And when you do the calculations, what you tend to find is that for a sort of typical household, they might spend about 16% of their budget on food if they want to meet that nutritional standard. So about $1 in every 6. And that's pretty manageable. But if you're a low-income family, then you're looking at spending anywhere between a quarter and half of your budget on food. I mean, who can spend half their budget on food? Especially when we live in a world where rent can quite easily take up half of your budget.
There's this thing called the poverty premium. It's a term coined in the 1960s to describe the idea that people on lower incomes pay more for essential goods and services. It's a double whammy for those people who don't have the time or means to shop around.
You hear so much of this well-meaning advice, Weet-Bix only costs, 50 cents for breakfast or whatever, or something Rodney Hyde once said, which is that bone broth is incredibly cheap and have people considered just getting by on a lot more bone broth.
Oh, gross, yuck. Oh.
Well, yeah, apart from
the
fact that sounds disgusting, and I don't want to live on bone broth, and I'm not going to try to impose that choice on anyone else. It's just totally impractical. I mean, who's going to spend, apart from well-off people, large parts of their lives making bone broth? How God knows how you even make it. I'm not sure I really want to know. Or all these ideas about, why don't poor people grow more of their own food and vegetables? And a really obvious rebuttal to that is, for one thing, if you're renting, and a lot of low-income households are, a lot of people in this community will be renting, you don't have much security of tenure, even with the changes that this government has brought in. And so making the investment of putting crops in the ground doesn't really make much sense if you don't know if you're going to be there to harvest them or not.
Also, I feel personally stigmatised by the whole crop growing thing. As someone who is totally can kill any succulent, or mint. And
yeah, mint is like a triffid. It really just grows and grows and grows.
Killed it.
Right, yeah. Yeah, well, I would suggest that the simple life is not for you.
No, God, no.
Whatever are we going to do with all the vegetables we have left over this fall?
Well, we'll eat them, of course.
We can't eat them all before they spoil.
Well, then we can can them.
Oh, that would be too expensive.
Say, maybe you're right. Anyway, we'll store them.
Store everything?
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to store some in the ground and the rest of them in the cellar and attic. You know, I've always wanted to try those things out, and here's my chance.
In 2008, a study by the now-defunct Families Commission compared the food habits of low and middle-income families. Each shared similar rituals, such as taking shopping lists to the supermarket and sitting down for dinner. The habits were relatively the same. It raised the moot point that low-income families are thwarted by the high cost of healthy food options.
Yeah, because at this point we have pretty well come out of what's generally regarded as Porirua East, suburbs of Cannons Creek and Aotearoa, and if you turn left here, we will be into what is known as the Aotearoa block.
Are we entering the Ritz?
We are. We are entering the local version of the Ritz. And this is a very striking story of disparity in New Zealand.
Wow, you can really see the difference, can't you?
Yeah, it's like night and day, isn't it?
It really is.
I often use this as an illustration of inequality because it's one of the most striking ones in New Zealand. This is a recent subdivision. It started sort of 10, 15 years ago, all privately led, mostly driven by a big property development company owned by a New Zealand rich lister. And, you know, the houses here, I mean, even when they started selling 10 years ago, so $800,000 a pop, and obviously they're worth a lot more than that now. You know, you're looking at $1 million for a lot of these places. The main point about the Aotearoa block, and it's really obvious from where we are in this car, is that we're right up on a hill, right? And so geography is doing the work of social stratification here, because literally this is the richer suburbs looking down on the poorer suburbs, because Aotearoa and Cannons Creek are right down there in the valley.
According to the tables which we have assembled, it is our estimate that 4% of the American people own 85% of the wealth of America, and that over 70% of the people of America don't own enough to pay the debts that they owe. How many men ever went to a barbecue and would let one man take off the table what's intended for 9/10 of the people to eat?
Unlike Porirua East, what you do notice in Cannons Creek is there's a glorious countdown supermarket. Supermarkets have actually come under fire recently, after the Commerce Commission released a study looking into the sector. The Commission, as a side note, is an independent Crown entity that enforces laws relating to competition, fair trading and consumer issues. In 2021, more than $22 billion was spent at grocery stores. In 2019, food was the second largest expense for households, with an average spend of $234 a week. Here's Tex Edwards from Monopoly Watch New Zealand.
Many people call it a supermarket duopoly. It's a collection of geographic monopolies. When you look very carefully at the layout of supermarkets in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, there are parts and suburbs that are geographically monopolised by one operator or the other.
The duopoly is made up of Foodstuffs and Woolworths. Foodstuffs owns New World, Pack and Save and Foursquare, and Australia's Woolworths owns Countdown, Fresh Choice and Super Value. Both companies also have in-house food brands.
Pack and Save get me to do the ads because I am super cheap to animate. The only thing cheaper is when I do it myself. Oh, hello, I am Stickman. Ooh, ooh, ooh.
The Commerce Commission found the duopoly choked competition and created barriers that stopped other food stores setting up shop or expanding. It said supermarkets have too much power over wholesalers and suppliers, making food prices higher compared to overseas equivalents. We've got the 5th most expensive food prices in the OECD. It estimated supermarkets were making about $430 million a year in excess profits. So, a total of 37 emails, calls, and texts were sent to Woolworths, Foodstuffs, and the Commerce Commission in the last 6 months, I might add, to come onto this podcast.
Can't take your call now. When you've finished recording, press hash for more options, or just hang up.
Kia ora, my name's Sasha Borissenko. I'm a journalist. I've been in touch for, I guess a couple of months. This is Sasha Borissenko calling. I'm a journalist. In an email, a Woolworths spokesperson disagreed with the assertion that the company's profits were excessive. It said profits were in line with global retailers and also lower than Australian retailers. I also got in touch with Foodstuffs, which said no individual at the company was able to talk about the wide range of topics I asked about. Here's Tex again, where he explains what the duopoly did to the market.
In economics, you have this thing called the bottleneck. So this is a bottle. And I actually pulled it up in the inquiry. This is one end of the bottle, this is the other end. And it's called bottleneck infrastructure. This is actually a supermarket. And you've got suppliers pushing the stuff in and it's consumers. Now you need to have no tight net on bottleneck with consumers. You've only got one supermarket. You would prefer to be 3. You'd go to, or 4 supermarkets, and you walk out here, you go one supermarket, you've got 4 of them. So there's no bottleneck on consumer. And if you're a supplier, if you're a avocado maker or a broccoli grower or a baked bean manufacturer, you want 4 supermarket channels to sell through so they can all treat you better. And if Jerry and Donna treat you badly, then you can go to Mary and Harry. You know what I'm saying? And a bottleneck is really quite important because in bottleneck industries, you often get regulation.
So what does this mean exactly? Tex says there's no competition on price. So a consequence of that is there's no competition on efficiency, also environmental impacts, or driving down the price of healthy food.
You wouldn't just see environmental competition where the supermarkets actively competed against who had the lowest carbon footprint and who created the lowest waste footprint in New Zealand. But you'd also have supermarkets that would compete actively on nutrition and dietary outcomes. The issue is health foods are a large part of supermarket offerings. But because there's no competition, it's pretend competition on nutrition outcomes. So in the supermarket, there's only competition between product A and product B, which might not be as available to the consumer because you've got shelf space arguments, you've got a dominant player buying up all the best shelf space, and if you're a marginal challenger, you're not going to get shelf space in a big supermarket.
Okay, and when you say shelf space, so I go in, I see one type of avocado that's $9 a pop. I go, there's a whole aisle dedicated to sugary drinks.
Yeah, that's a good call, yeah. Processed food and food with longer life, shelf life, is a more profitable item than quickly perishing fresh fruit and veg.
Citing a failure in the market, the Commerce Commission recommended changing our laws to make it easier for new competitors. It also suggested creating a grocery commissioner to ensure suppliers and wholesalers, the people behind the products on the shelves, get a better deal. Last year, former Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister David Clark officially put supermarkets on notice. He also accepted 12 of the Commission's 14 recommendations.
The report is very clear. Competition in the retail grocery sector in New Zealand is not working. Consumers would get better prices, range and quality if there was more effective competition in the sector. The Commission has confirmed that the two major grocery retailers operate as a duopoly, and there is little prospect of new or expanding rivals to achieve the scale and geographic coverage required to compete effectively with the major grocery retailers.
And just like that, the Commerce Grocery Sector Covenants Amendment Bill was introduced to deal with the zoning matters, and the Grocery Industry Competition Bill was passed to deal with the rest. Woolworths said it supported the zoning bill and welcomed the competition bill as well. It's now got 13 signed agreements with wholesale customers, and it will continue to make pricing clearer across its stores. Foodstuffs declined to comment. So, we're kind of getting somewhere, but has the government done enough? Tex doesn't think so.
The legislation doesn't create a clear pathway to like-for-like competition, which would create a price outcome for consumers. The issue is Christmas is coming tomorrow. So is good weather, hopefully. But actually, when people are discussing the supermarket legislation, it's pretend competition that might come. It's a fantasy, absolute fantasy legislation to suggest that a like-for-like industrial $2 or $3 billion capitalised player with a like-for-like product offering is coming anywhere near New Zealand anytime soon unless there is structural separation. It doesn't have a market structure that controls margins or monopolised incentives for owners. The legislation is an absolute dream come true for supermarket owners because they can go off and buy a new jet, a new boat, a new Ferrari, whatever they need, because it actually just postpones, delays and confuses the onset of real like-for-like competition. It's factually incorrect to say that it's too difficult to break up the supermarket cartel. What's correct to say is that it's globally unique that New Zealand's the only country in the OECD that has a supermarket duopoly.
New Minister in Charge, Duncan Webb, was too busy to come onto the podcast, but in a statement he said this.
I'm confident we've got the broad settings right. The sector knows that if they do not take action to ensure Kiwis are getting a better deal, we'll take further action than we already have. Divestment isn't off the table, but I want to see the effect of the changes we have just made before taking further steps. This government is cracking down on supermarkets and banks. We're working hard to address the cost of living by addressing what Kiwis are paying at the checkout.
Tex says the Commerce Commission isn't up to scratch either.
The Commerce Commission need to set up a broken markets division, rebrand themselves and understand that they need to fix 2 or 3 broken markets each decade. These broken markets have evolved as a consequence of New Zealand having the most bizarre, non-existent competition law for almost 30 years.
A grocery commissioner was appointed in July this year. In a statement, the Commerce Commission said market studies aren't a quick fix. Any policy decisions like rebranding, setting up a broken markets division, or looking at the legislation is outside of its jurisdiction. So it's a government thing. Here's Duncan Webb again. Well, kind of.
The Commerce Act has been around for a while, but whether it's time for a review of the entire Act is a separate question. What we're doing at present is looking at ways to improve how markets work.
What I've missed here is the fact Aotearoa is incredibly fertile. Ironically, we produce enough food to feed 40 million people. The Ministry for Primary Industries told me we export between 90 and 95% of our food. Even the Commerce Commission cited some of these problems, where suppliers are forced to look to overseas markets because of the restrictive ties to some of the supermarkets. What's often said is that we just don't have the population size, so suppliers are forced to export overseas. Could this be a decision to favour profits over people? A personal choice, even? Here's Waikato University's Dr. Rebecca Graham. She's an expert in food insecurity.
So food is no longer just about feeding ourselves, but it's around export, it's around creating an economy, it's around creating money and wealth. And so we have this tension where if you are growing food, of course you want the best price for it. You want to be able to sell it where you can get the most money for it. And sometimes that is not in New Zealand. And then because of things like exchange rates and so on, other economies are able to purchase our food for cheaper than what it costs us here in New Zealand. So there's all these global tensions that are happening, and it's not just happening in New Zealand, it's happening across the world. But one of the things that really sticks out to me is that we could, as a country, we could choose to change that if we wanted to. We could choose to change how we sell our food, how we grow our food, who our growers can sell to, and also ensure that our people are always able to purchase affordable food that we need.
The fundamental issue is, like no national direction around food swamps or food deserts, there's not really a nationwide coordinated framework in Aotearoa around accessing sufficient food. There are ad hoc policies, sure. There's the free Fruit in Schools program, available to some schools, or the Food Secure Communities program that supports food banks and the like. But there are funding issues, prioritisation issues, and ministry coordination issues. It's a theme that I suspect will be rearing its ugly head again throughout the podcast. Meanwhile, the impact means about 33% of New Zealand adults say they face moderate food security, meaning they're regularly uncertain they'll have enough food to eat. Here's Rebecca Graham again.
The United Nations has a definition, it's used, globally. So it's not just around filling your belly, but it's around having access to the sorts of foods that encourage growth, that encourage well-being, that encourage health, and also being able to access in ways that are socially acceptable. And there's been a very reluctance, not just by the government, but by New Zealand as a nation, there's been a reluctance to really want to grapple with what this means and how it works and what we actually need to do.
I'm Sasha Borissenko, and that was episode 3 of Chewing the Facts. It was written, directed and produced by me. Executive producer was Teresa Cowie from Connect Content. Post-production and sound design was by Oliver Devlin. Theme music by Thomas Lambert. With special thanks to Andrew Laxon, Ethan Sills, Joanna McLeod, and many, many more. Follow Chewing the Facts on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on TikTok and Insta at Chewing the Facts NZ. New episodes are out every Sunday. This podcast was made in collaboration with the New Zealand Herald, with support by New Zealand On Air. In the next episode, I'll be chewing the facts about diets, or as I like to call them, diets schmiets. Do they work? And what are they doing to your brain and body?
Everyone would like to believe that losing weight is very much easier than it is. But for example, people who are well into what medical science calls the obese range have approximately one chance in 1,300 people to get back into the normal weight range in any given year.
See ya.